You are watching Area DMG.
Disclaimer: a digital copy of Cave Story Plus was provided to this outlet, Area DMG, by Nicholas. However, that did not prevent me from going out and buying this game physically because, hello, it's Cave Story. Now let's get on to the review. Welcome back to Area DMG. I'm your host, Phil Wesley, the Mile High Mouth, and today we're going to take a game-worthy look at Cave Story Plus for the Nintendo Switch. Now keep in mind that the gameplay footage I'm showing you in the background is from Cave Story Plus for the Nintendo Switch, and, well, I'm not going to discuss story spoilers. Cave Story is kind of story heavy. I mean, story is part of the name, but the majority of the game, or rather the gameplay, is what we're going to get into. Cave Story is the brainchild, or rather the product of about 3 or 5 years of effort from one person, and then it became popular on the PC, and then it started getting upgraded. We've had all sorts of different remixes. It's been released on like the Nintendo 3DS, the Nintendo DSi, the Nintendo Wii U, a couple other things, I think, well, PC, I guess, and finally, Cave Story Plus is landing on the Nintendo Switch. If you've played Cave Story, you know all about Cave Story, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell you right now that you should probably pick this up. There are 4 musical tracks in here, that one of them is from the remastered Cave Story 3D version, and then one's completely new, and of course there's the original, and then a Famitrax one, and all that stuff. It's interesting. You can switch between those in the main menu and play through with the soundtrack of your choosing. They've improved the graphics quite a bit over some of the other versions by redoing a lot of the main graphics for the characters, the items, weapons, and enemies. And they've also gone through and added facial expressions and movement whenever a character is talking. The game, as you can tell, is actually pretty nice looking. There's a lot of dynamic lighting effects. You'll note that whenever you shoot your gun, there's a little bit of light that follows it. This is actually pretty great. It's a very subtle, but also really, really wonderful effect that they've added. There are some brand new levels that are added, essentially. The little challenges, there are some brand new ones in this version, as well as, of course, the Curly Story version of the game, and 3 difficulty levels, beginner, original, and hard, or difficult, or expert, or whatever you want to call that. Experienced. The basic gameplay is thus. You start out as a robot, or I think you're a robot? Dun dun dun. No, you are. You're totally a robot. Anyways, you wake up with no recollection of why you're in this cave. So you wander out, and then you go and find a gun. And from there on out, you're just kind of going from area to area, and the story just kind of happens around you. Similar to like games like, say, Undertale, or I guess one of the easiest things to compare it to would be, games like like Super Metroid, where a lot of the story takes place away from what's being told. You're not, in fact, like when you're playing through Cave Story the first time, you're playing as Quote, the little robot there, and Quote doesn't actually talk, so he's kind of a silent protagonist. Once you unlock the whole Curly Story thing, Curly, a character that you run into later in the game and that you can play as, who will also be accessible in an upcoming co-op mode that they will be adding to Cave Story Plus in the future, is a lot more talkative. There's a lot more dialogue between her and the other characters in this. Essentially, what you do is, well, you get a weapon. When you shoot things, they let loose like hearts, which refill your life, or little triangles which you can collect to level up your weapons. When you level up your weapons, they become more and more effective for the most part. There is a weapon where the opposite is true, but I'm not going to tell you what weapon that is. You'll have to discover that for yourself. Also, there's a lot of exploration in this, actually. If it weren't for the fact that, it's a cave, quote, story, anyways, cave story. Part of this is exploring. It's kind of a throwback to like Super Metroid or Castlevania Symphony of the Night, in that you're going to be spending a lot of time exploring. You can backtrack to areas that you've been at a certain point, and you'll be able to find items that you might have missed, like missile upgrades or life upgrades, which, by the way, when you pick up a life tank, it makes a noise which sounds exactly pretty much like what would happen when you pick up a life upgrade or a missile upgrade in Super Metroid or in Metroid. And I think that's pretty great. The game itself, aside from the leveling up your weapons, you can level up your character with extra life or with certain types of items. Like you'll find a map item, or you'll find an item that cuts down the amount of damage the amount of experience that you lose when you take a hit. There are other items that you may miss or that you'll find and have to give to other characters or whatnot. But it's not like a fetch type quest game. You're not drastically running around picking up 5 of something. No, for the most part, that's kept to a bare minimum. It's got an emphasis on action, and you'll find that in between these fairly decent action interludes, driven by a pretty fantastic soundtrack, which, by the way, there are 4 sound options in Cave Story Plus. There's Famitrax, Organia, Remastered, and then Cave Story Plus. Organia being the original, Famitrax being an NES take on that. The remastered stuff being, from Cave Story, the Cave Story Plus and Cave Story Remastered stuff. Sorry, from Cave Story 3D and Cave Story Plus being from, Cave Story Plus. There's a lot here. You can switch between those in the main menu. Personally, I'd like to be able to switch between those in the main game. Maybe they'll patch in that ability in the future, but it's not there now. I'd like to be able to pause the game and switch out the soundtrack. That would be nice. Unfortunately, you can't do that. If it were up to me, you'd be able to also switch to the original graphics or to the Cave Story 3D style graphics. Although there is an extra area in Cave Story 3D that is not in this game, there are some new challenges and interesting little modes with that are brand new to this version of Cave Story. If you played Cave Story before, your incentive to purchase this is that one, it's on the Nintendo Switch, and there is co-op mode coming soon, and co-op mode will be exclusive to Cave Story Plus. Also, there's a physical version of it, which is the first time that has been released physically, which includes a soundtrack, a published instructional booklet, and a couple other little goodies. Unfortunately, if you miss out on that, I'm not sure that the second run will have all of those neat little goodies, so if you're a fan of Cave Story, rush out there and grab that immediately if you can, because that's actually going to be pretty sweet. Anywho, if you're picking up digitally, the big reason to pick it up digitally if you've already played through Cave Story is that, it's Cave Story, and there's some new options and some new items, and they went back and redid a bunch of the different graphics. For example, now all the characters move or look like they're talking when they say their dialogue, which is fantastic. They've redone a lot of the item graphics, the weapon graphics, the enemy graphics, the main character sprites. Overall, it's a pretty complete package, and you can take it with you on the go or pop it onto the computer onto the TV in 1080p at 60 frames per second or whatnot on the Nintendo Switch. If you've never played Cave Story, you need to play Cave Story. Cave Story is a fantastic Metroidvania style game, or kind of like Super Metroid, kind of like Castlevania. That whole trope with that, right? Anyways, The basic, like I said, the basic flow of the game is you go from place to place as the story dictates, or you can kind of ignore the story at a certain point and just explore some of the other areas to pick up heart containers, missile containers, and so on. There's multiple endings, and there are certain items that you need to find or use in order to get a better ending. This game is pretty challenging still. In fact, the area that you have to go through to get the best ending is still intensely difficult and just completely unfair. But I mean, seriously, when you get to that area, there's this part that you can drop down, which looks like it'll be a shortcut, but it's actually just a sign that says "Welcome to Hell." Which pretty much, once you get to that particular thing, you'll realize that, yeah, Cave Story is known for having extremely difficult bosses and some pretty fantastic, challenging running gun gameplay and platforming. Especially the last area where you have to utilize a jetpack to properly get yourself over a bunch of stuff, and also you have to be fairly good at dodging enemies and filling the area with like bullets and stuff. Pretty much, this is a tough game. It knows it's a tough game, and it's not apologetic about that at all. In fact, I would say that there's a lot of great challenge in here. The bosses, the first time you go through, even the second or third or fourth time you go through, you'll probably lose to some of those bosses. I mean, they do have predictable patterns and ways to deal with those patterns, but once you figure those out, there's still no guarantee that you're going to win. There's a lot of challenge to it. It also keeps track of how long you've been playing the game, so if you want to try and beat it under a certain amount of times, this is a fantastic game for speed running. It's also a fantastic game for just setting up challenges for yourself. If you're watching the gameplay footage that's running in the background, you'll note that I haven't actually saved. I just wanted to see, like, I'll see how far we get into that. But this was just recorded so that I could have something in the background while I review the game. Anyways, the music in the game is fantastic. I think I mentioned before that there are 4 different soundtrack options for it. It is just amazing music. I would say the music in here it gets in your head and it sticks in your head and it stays in your head and it's good. It's like the best kind of music from like a Metroid or a Mega Man type game that just, it pumps you up and invigorates you to keep going. The story, a part of Cave Story, if you've never experienced it before, you really do need to experience it. It's full of well-written characters, kind of horrible situations, and it's touching. It's a really good story. You like these characters. Even when terrible things happen in the game, you still like the characters. You still feel for them. It's one of those games where you're playing through it and the story part is just as important as the cave exploration part of it. You'll just feel good or feel bad, depending on what endings you get or how hard you try and strive for this in this game. By the way, there is kind of the way to get to like the better ending is to skip a certain part and get a certain item a little bit later on, as well as picking up something called a tow rope. You might want to make sure you get that. And then, of course, there's certain little side quests that you have to complete to get to that. But I'm not going to do any spoilers on that. I'm just saying that it's well worth it to try and figure that out for yourself. And even if it takes you a couple playthroughs, it's still worth it. The game is well crafted. The level design is spot on. Enemies aren't ridiculously tough. When you upgrade your guns by picking up experience and such, that's a fluid, dynamic part of the gameplay. You will sometimes have to go back and grind or farm enemies for experience, but that's fine. There are also, you can upgrade some of your guns, you can trade in your guns for other guns. There's a lot to it. There's also a lot of interesting little sequences in it where you have to go find an item and take it back or do certain type of stuff. And that doesn't actually get tedious because it's still fairly dynamic and well put together. You're given, if you find it, a pretty good map. The game also does a pretty good job of checkpointing. There's a lot of little save and refill stations in the game. It makes it fair, is the best way to put it. Some areas are just, oi, there's this one area near I would say near the end part, which is just, ooh, it's a little bit rough, but it's okay. When you get through it, you'll be like, yeah, that was definitely worth getting through because, oi, that was a challenge, but you feel good when you complete that challenge. You know what I mean? A lot of the game is just challenging and fun. It's a rough game in the terms that it is challenging and tough, but there is an easy mode for beginners, so don't worry too much about that. You can't get the best ending in the easy mode because they won't let you access a particular thing at that level. But once you play through it normally, or if you try and play through it on hard, you'll get there, you'll get better, you'll appreciate it. You're learning along with the main character, quote, as you go through this. Overall, I feel like the music is top notch, the game is top notch, the gameplay is solid. If you've never played Cave Story, just rush out and get it right away. If you've played Cave Story, this is worth it for the extras and the attention to detail. Also, if you've got a Nintendo Switch, why wouldn't you want one of the best games out there on your Nintendo Switch? Especially considering that co-op mode is coming up and you can play it with a friend. Which, yeah, that's actually pretty awesome. Anywho, my final verdict on this game is that Cave Story has always been like a perfect 10. It's like a 100% game, almost. Maybe I would say like a 98%, because there aren't too many games that are a perfect 100%. The only things that I do say it has a little bit of difficulty with is, well, at first when you first start out, your jumping is a little bit floaty. It takes a little bit of getting used to compared to, say, like a Mario or an actual Metroid or Castlevania game. And some of the stuff that you have to do to get to the perfect ending seems a little bit, yeah. One thing that I would like them to have added to this is some type of indication of how much fuel you have left in your jetpack when you use it. Like maybe a little bar or something that lets you know. That way you don't have to kind of wing it whenever you're just kind of going through a particular area in the game. Anyone who's played Cave Story, you know what area I'm talking about. It's at the end. That would have been kind of nice to know, especially considering how you have to time literally to a perfect pitch some of the areas right at the beginning of that area. Like there's a part there where you have to jump down into an area above all these types of spikes, hit just enough of your of this particular jetpack that you get later on in the game to leave just a little bit so that you can hop up onto a little ledge a little bit later in that same section on this. Well, that part's a little rough, but once you get past it, like the first time you get that down, it's worth it. A lot of this game here is rough, and by rough I mean it is challenging, tough, etc., etc. It's not for everyone, I would say, because normal difficulty and hard difficulty are a bit too much for some players, but everyone should try and play through it. That's why there's an easy mode on it, which is kind of nice. You've got 3 different difficulties. You have additional challenges or challenge levels that you can unlock in the game, many of which are exclusive to Cave Story Plus. So if you are a fan of Cave Story, there's some exclusive challenges in here that you haven't gotten to check out yet, and you definitely should. You can also play through and check out different items. There's some stuff that's been redone just slightly. It's a very versatile game, and it's one of the best platform games out there. I loved it. I would say that this is definitely game worthy. If you are a fan of Cave Story and you already know how good this game is, you already know that this game, in comparison to those, does offer just a little bit more than previous versions, and that might dictate whether or not you purchase it. I think you should. It's pretty darn cheap. I mean, it's like $30 physical, but you get stuff with that, and honestly, this is the first time it's been available physically ever. If you're a fan of Cave Story, you kind of owe it to yourself to get that, to put it on your shelf. Even if you don't own a Switch, you should probably just do that, just to say you have it. And then when you eventually do get a Nintendo Switch, then you'll be able to play it. But yeah, I loved it. This is a great game. If I were giving it a percentage score, I would say it's like a 95 to 97%. The big thing there is kind of the difficulty curve just kind of shoots up at one point, and that can be a little offsetting for brand new players, but it does kind of ease you into that. There is an easy mode for younger players, and a lot of the features like the co-op mode are not available when it launches, which is kind of a shame. Feel free to add like 1 or 2 more points to that score once the co-op mode shows up. But for right now, Cave Story is an amazing game and you should pick it up. I wholeheartedly recommend it. To me, Cave Story Plus is completely game worthy. And if you haven't picked it up yet or played any of the previous ones, you need to go do that right away. This is a game you need to own. You need to play it. It is worth your time and worth your play. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Cave Story Plus. Did you pick it up? Do you agree with my review or disagree with my review? Let me know in those comments below. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't already. Hit that share button if you haven't already. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And then make sure that you hit that little bell so that you are notified whenever we have a brand new episode of Area DMG. And until the next episode comes out, you are now caught up.